Welcome to our first Lunch and Learn of 2021 on the Hollywood Theater. My name is Sarah Carlson. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of virtually meeting, I'm the program manager of Vancouver Heritage Foundation. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by Marianne Amodio. And we are delighted to have you here with us this afternoon. So before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that the work of VHF takes place on the traditional, ancestral, unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I know many of us are joining from these lands this afternoon. Some of you might be joining from elsewhere in the province or maybe in the country. So I invite you to reflect on the Indigenous people whose traditional lands you occupy. VHF is a registered charity that promotes the appreciation and conservation of heritage places in Vancouver. We do this through educational programming, special projects, informational resources, and grants. So we're really excited about today because this is our first Lunch and Learn, which has been on hiatus since 2017. So these lunchtime talks feature current heritage projects and topics, and we're really excited that we're renewing these series, starting with a look at the Hollywood Theater and its recent revitalization. So designed by Harold Cullerne in 1935 for the Farleigh family, the Art Deco movie theater was one of the last remaining single-screen movie theaters in the city when it closed in 2011. VHF also, we hosted a film series at the Hollywood in 2012, 2013. So some of you might remember or have attended that. So I'm just going to introduce Marianne and then I will pass things over to her. So Marianne Amodio holds a master's degree in architecture from the University of Manitoba, is a registered architect with the Architectural Institute of British Columbia, and a LEED accredited professional. She is currently a member of the City of Vancouver Regulatory Review Advisory Committee, and she sits on the board of the Eastside Cultural Crawl. Marianne started her own architectural studio in 2010 before joining forces with Farleigh, who unfortunately isn't able to join us this afternoon, to launch MA+HG Architects Incorporated in 2018. So thank you so much for being with us this afternoon, Marianne, and over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah, and thanks to Judith as well for the invitation, and also thank you for the land acknowledgement. I won't repeat it, but obviously the sentiment is shared. And thank you all for coming. I can't see any of you, I'm just seeing my screen, but I expect I'm looking at many eager and excited faces. This project was so meaningful and important to our studio. I'll tell you a little bit, maybe just a little bit more about us. I run this practice with my husband, Harold Cullerne, as Sarah mentioned, and we are a small office and we only take on a few projects a year, and they're mostly around the creation of innovative and affordable housing. And oftentimes those projects have another element to them, such as the Hollywood Theater. And we find those elements to be so enriching and meaningful in the work that we do, because they elevate the housing work, not just to be about the residents who might eventually live in the housing, but also to be meaningful to the community at large. A lot of our philosophy of our practice is based on this idea that we call social density. And social density is a philosophy, it's actually co-opted, it's a co-opted psychological term, which means the density in areas of the number of people and also the number of interpersonal reactions that are likely to happen in a setting. So what's important to us about that statement is that it's not just about the number of people that you're putting on a site, but also it's about how people interact and how you can form community on a site. And so you can see how when we were deliberating the restoration and retention of the Hollywood Theater, how its presence became so important to the creation of the new community we were building here. So the Hollywood Theater, as Sarah introduced and as probably most of you know, was built in 1930s by Harold Cullerne, and it was owned by the Farleigh family for many generations until it was shuttered in 2007. I do have to acknowledge as well just the magnificent and thorough and important work of Don Luxton in the course of this process. We wouldn't have been able to do this project without his input and his support. But anyway, the Hollywood Theatre is one of the last remaining examples of the Art Deco style in Vancouver. It's also one of the last surviving neighborhood single screen cinemas. It came up at the same time as as City Hall, as the Lionsgate Bridge. And I think one of the things that was really interesting, this is actually a quote from Don, but one of our favorite parts about it was that the style was really brought to bear in the city as a proclamation of youth, of modernity, of a progressive attitude, and of the future, really. And even though it was built in the 30s, we really felt like that attitude was so relevant to today, that there was a real optimism about the time that the theater evoked. And I think in a lot of ways there's a lot of pessimism about the density that we're building in Vancouver, and we really wanted to try to just reach out and grab some of the optimism of the time of the 30s. So we understand that the building of the Hollywood Theatre is so important, but also what is just as important was its use. Its use as a single screen theater, its use as a place to see film, and its use as a place to bring community together under that guise. So we understood that as well over the course of our work. And I think that's something that the City of Vancouver started to rename intangible heritage. So we're seeing that term used over and over again now in the City of Vancouver. So what it means is that the heritage isn't just about the physical place, but it's also about the events that took place in those buildings, and also the community that it formed. So the Hollywood Theatre and the site next door was brought about through a construct that the City of Vancouver has called a Heritage Revitalization Agreement. So a Heritage Revitalization Agreement is a tool that allows for the retention and restoration of a building, and in this case, its use, in exchange for alternates outside of what is ordinarily permitted under zoning. So this might be a variance of use, density, siting, and what this does is it creates a tool by which you can negotiate the retention and restoration of a heritage amenity. So that's what we did here. So these are sort of the steps, for those of you who don't know, to a successful heritage revitalization agreement. First, the property needs to qualify. Then a proposal is negotiated for the development and terms of the agreement that must include the preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation of the heritage building, as well as the designation. And then the owner submits a development application. There's a financial analysis to ensure that any additional density that is beyond what is permitted, it corresponds with the financial contribution to the restoration of the heritage amenity. Then there's a council approval, which also involves a public hearing. And then the notice is placed on the property title in the land title office. It sounds really simple, but of course, as with anything in the City of Vancouver, it was a protracted and complex process. And that process for us, we knew that. I guess our history with the project is that we had worked with the owner on the Commodore building and some small restoration work that happened over there. And I knew that he owned the Hollywood Theatre. And after we had completed, or while the work for the Commodore was ongoing, I just basically kept asking him to let us have a look. I was like, just let us have a shot at the Hollywood Theatre. Let us have a shot at the theater. And at that time, we didn't know that the site next door was also in play. And so for us, the proposal was really about saving the Hollywood Theatre. We knew that it had been shuttered for some time, that there weren't any, there hadn't been a film shown there in a really long time, and that there was a lot of controversy about and concern in the community about what was going to happen with the buildings. So our first step was really, we came in naive. I think that was to our benefit, because we wanted to come in sort of unburdened by what had happened before. Our first proposal to the owner and to the City of Vancouver was that we undergo a period of consultation and conversation. We called them the curiosity sessions. And we did that for about 3 months. And we basically talked to anyone that we could think of, anyone who was referred to us, about the Hollywood Theatre, their experience with it, the meaningfulness of it to them, and what was important to them about the theater. So everyone from neighborhood residential groups to obviously heritage consultants, local business owners, and City of Vancouver Cultural Services, the corporate management team at the City of Vancouver, anyone that we could really think of to sort of formulate goals for the project. And I think that was fundamentally what we were trying to gain from the work. We knew that there were a lot of disparate voices, all equally important, all coming from different points of view. And we knew that we had to bring all those voices together under a shared set of goals in order for the project to be successful at all. So the first 3 months of our work were really, really about that. And this slide is really just showing our timeline up until approval for the project at development permit stage. So where it says City Council hearing, ... that was in July of 2018. And then of course, after that came all of our permitting related to building permit. So this was just sort of public and development services approval process, which we just loved. We just loved that engagement with everyone. We really thought it was an important thing to do. It's not normally the role of the architect to engage with the community, but we just thought it was so important to hear everyone's voices. So at the end of the consultation stage, the curiosity sessions, we came up with these common goals for the project. And these 6 goals, we really tried to hold on tight to them throughout the design process, so that we could just maintain that thread of just honesty about what everybody wanted, and just to remind everybody that this was sort of what we're aiming for. So the number 1 goal was obviously the restoration and revitalization of the Hollywood Theatre. We didn't hear from anybody that they wanted the building to be torn down and the use removed. So that was an easy shared goal. And so we knew that framing the project around that, and just ensuring that the restoration of the Hollywood Theatre was the most important part of this project, and accentuating that and ensuring that our work was really centered around that was the most important goal. Secondly, maintaining the theater use as a neighborhood cultural amenity was also very important. This resulted in a community use agreement on the project that was negotiated with the owners and operators and cultural services at the City of Vancouver. Respecting and enhancing the Broadway streetscape. This was super important to us as architects. We believe that the most important part of a building occurs at its public face. We do spend a lot of time looking up in Vancouver, and we do encourage all of anyone who looks at our projects and anybody in Vancouver to look at grade to ensure that we're retaining local mom and pop shops, which is such a huge part of the West Broadway streetscape, to ensure that we're enhancing that streetscape by rhythm and pattern. We knew that we wanted to minimize the impact on the residential neighborhood to the north, just because of the siting of the Hollywood sites on the north side of the block. We knew that there was a potential shadow impact. All the buildings on Broadway are underbuilt to their zoning already. We knew that we were going to go higher on the building next door, so that was a really important part of our work. We knew we had to achieve the owner's FSR requirement. That was crucial to the successful implementation of the project. It had to pencil out. And we wanted to create a new architecture with a 6-story massing that complements and responds to the existing theater. So these were our 6 goals. As we proceeded forward, we established them early on in the process and carried them on throughout the project. So this was the deal that we made with the city. So the deal was that under a Vancouver Heritage Revitalization Agreement, the owner proposed to secure the Hollywood Theatre as a heritage building, to secure the use of the Hollywood Theatre as a live act film theater venue, secure not-for-profit and free event use through a community use agreement, to restore the theater building in accordance with the Heritage Conservation Plan that was completed by Don Luxton and Associates, to rehabilitate the theater in accordance with the Vancouver Building Bylaw. And in exchange, the owner requests a density bonus of 0.19 FSR transferable to the 2 sites adjacent, and a relaxation on the building height to allow for a 6-story building on the height adjacent. So that was really about a transfer of the allowable density of the Hollywood Theatre onto the site next door, and a bonus of 0.19 in exchange for the restoration and rehabilitation of the theater. So this was the condition that we found the theater in. When we found it, it was in pretty good shape. I think in general, there wasn't a lot of it was structurally strong. The envelope was strong. So we were really grateful for that there wasn't a lot of severe damage, even though the building had been shuttered and cold. That was the one thing that we really remarked on originally, that it was quite cold in there. You know, the theater, the lobby area, I think had been quite renovated over time, but there were still a number of existing features that we wanted to retain and restore, that we knew were important, including the original terrazzo, the original sconces and other features that I can lay out shortly. So this is what it looked like. The great thing about the Hollywood Theatre, I think that really struck me when I first went in, was it's really its modesty. Like, it's not a grand, extravagant theater. It's really meant to be, I think, when it was designed, an everyday building. And I think that was important to us as architects, not to elevate it to a point where it becomes too precious. So in our design work for the rehabilitation and restoration of the theater, we really wanted to keep that modesty in mind. We wanted everybody who walked in to feel comfortable. Yeah. So this is a construction document. I think that it's always interesting to show the construction documents in presentations like this, because I think community groups tend to see the first end, which is development permit drawings, which are really design drawings. But you rarely get to see the construction documents, which shows the execution of the work. So this slide in particular is talking about the restoration of the exterior facade. So of course, the biggest element of the restoration of the exterior was the replacement and restoration of all the neon. And that was a really exciting project for us. Our partner in that, the Trade Signature Signs, did just a remarkable job, particularly at the vertical sign. Blade sign at the front face. But this was just a huge part of the restoration. And the rest of it was really about repair, scraping and paint, and ensuring that the envelope of the building was secure and safe. This is a slide showing the existing plans, just so I can show you the difference in the plan, particularly at the first floor. The time in which it was built obviously was under a different building code and under different requirements. And because we were upgrading the theater, we did have to comply with certain building code upgrade requirements. When you restore a heritage building, there is a part of the section that is geared towards the upgrade of heritage buildings. So they don't need to be 100% to the building bylaw, but there were some things that we needed to do to upgrade the building. And specifically that was related to washrooms, honestly, and for two reasons. One, because there were no accessible washrooms in the theater, so we did have to provide for accessible washrooms. And two, in order to maintain a similar occupant load that the Hollywood Theater already enjoyed, we had to actually increase the bathroom count. So the original occupant load of the Hollywood Theater was 698 seats. And in order to get it to, we got it to 628 seats, we had to add a whole bunch of washrooms. So originally the washroom count was 8, and we had to, or the fixture count, so the number of toilets was 8, and we had to increase that to 15. It sounds like a really boring thing, but it really impacted the design of the theater in a really significant way, because for us, we wanted to ensure that those washrooms were hidden within the fabric of the original building, and that they weren't extraneous and they didn't pop out or they didn't look strange. So we really wanted to knit them in as though they had already been there, and there were a lot of them. So that work, that design work, was really quite huge. So this is a drawing showing the proposed floor plan of the Hollywood Theater as executed. So one of the most significant parts of it, besides the increase in washrooms that you can see over on the right-hand side of the screen here, as well as underneath the mezzanine at the universal toilet room and this bank of washrooms here, is that we flattened out the slope. One of the requirements of the development permit was that the slope be retained, and that was simply because that was simply a device to retain the use. And so what we were able to do with the platform area was to retain the slope beneath it, but add in this platform area so that we could allow for a flat area that could promote different types of uses. So while previously the Hollywood Theater was strictly a single screen movie theater, we understood that in this day and age, that is just simply not a viable business proposition, and that whomever was going to come in to operate the theater needed it to be a multi-use venue. So that includes lectures, film, performances of all kinds. So in order to accommodate that, we added this platform area with 2 bars. And so that changed the form a little bit, and from a design perspective, really made us think about how, again, we wanted to knit that element into the fabric, the existing fabric of the building. So that was a huge part of the renovation and restoration. And a lot of the parts of the renovation and restoration were really about the small bits as well. We knew that there were the existing clock at the stage, for example. The existing sconces were replicated and restored. There's signage there from the 30s, the lobby signage, the men and women's washroom signage that was retained and restored. The plaster at the ceiling of the lobby was retained and restored. The projection room, of course, was retained and restored. The old seats were hand sanded, painstakingly restored by the operator, restored all the woodwork, replaced the existing curtains with new fire-rated material. And then the upgrades were significant: new sprinkler system, new mechanical systems, new electrical systems. So running those through this old building structure was really quite challenging. especially because we were just trying to hide it all. And we had very limited footprint in which to do that. And I think it's a testament to all the tradespeople and the contractor on site that we were successfully able to make that happen. I think it's pretty seamless in there right now. Of course, there was addition of new guardrails and handrails as well, which formed a big part of the design aesthetic. This is a rendering of the lobby, the concession area that we kept for popcorn and for drinks when you first come into the theater. A lot of that was about the idea of replicating the idea of a drape and draperies. We also noted at the lobby that there was a real distinguishment between the lobby entrance and the theater, and we wanted to maintain that sense of awe and wonder when you open the theater doors, which was rendered originally in all red. So that was a huge part of our concept moving forward with the design, is the retention of this idea of sort of red everywhere. So all the furniture, all the new furnishings, all the new upholstery, new paint, curtain replacement was all rendered in red with the wood as a contrast. And we thought that tied into the spirit of the times, this sort of brass, red, wood kind of concept. So the next most significant part, obviously, of the project was really about the building next door, which is currently under construction. And as I mentioned before, this was really about minimizing the impact on the residential neighborhood to the north, as well as creating a deliberate and poignant streetscape adjacent to the Hollywood Theater, as well as finding a way to tie these two elements together. So of course, in step one, the first thing that we did as a massing strategy was simply extrude stick stories. We knew that that wasn't going to be good enough for this work. So the second step was really about pulling the bulk of the massing to the West Broadway side and away from the low-rise residential neighborhood to the north. That reduces the shadow impact on those residences to the north. And we studied very carefully the location of everybody's rose garden and tomato patches back there to ensure that we were doing our best to minimize it so that it wouldn't be beyond what was normally permitted on a 4-story building on that site. Our third step was really the creation of this public realm. So we took the whole facade of the building and pushed it back by about 10 feet at the street level. And that was to allow the Hollywood Theater to push forward. And you can actually see it now on site that the side of the Hollywood Theater there is exposed. It's this beautiful board and batten concrete. And the idea there is to create an active streetscape immediately adjacent to the Hollywood Theater. Finally, we had this additional FSR area that we knew we didn't want on the front of the building, we didn't want on the back of the building, and we weren't permitted to put on top of the building, both because of the decisions that we had made with both the city and the neighborhood groups that in no way were we permitted to go over 6 stories here. So that additional mass, we decided to create an overhang over the Hollywood Theater, which we felt inextricably tied the two buildings together. So the overhang protects the building from any future development. And it also recognizes visually that the two are tied together. The concept for the building next door was really drawn from the Art Deco period, these ideas of linearity and movement, color and pattern, and again, as I mentioned before, the linking and intertwining of these two buildings. We wanted to create a bold expression that was reflective of the times of the Hollywood Theater, as I'd mentioned early on. And we were excited to have that opportunity on this site here. You know, this is before the Broadway plan is coming down here. So we knew we had an opportunity to do something that was artistic, creative, and outside of the constraints of City of Vancouver development planning. So this is a diagram talking about the theater connection and the public realm. The diagram on the right shows how the building sort of sets back from the facade of the Hollywood Theater, so that at the Broadway streetscape, the place that we all walk on and the place that we all interact with directly, there's an experience there of that the theater is the most important part by simply projecting it forward, and reducing a canopy on that streetscape. So the canopy on the Hollywood residential building is formed by the overhang above, so as not to project a canopy that would then eliminate the view of the Hollywood while you're walking down the street. So that was the first thing that we did. We pulled the building facade back to widen the public realm and create space for gathering. The setback also allowed for the Hollywood Theater to stand proud and to celebrate its presence on the street. The Hollywood Theater would be restored and alive, which it almost is now. I wish that you could all go. We had this idea of colorful soffits drawing from the Art Deco palette of the times, so that when you're on the street looking above, you're reminded of that time period. Deep overhangs undulate and run along the facade, creating a sense of linearity and movement. And we lowered the commercial ceiling heights so that they would be similar to that of the Hollywood Theater, and that it would create a more human oriented street. We also we purposefully put the residential entry in the middle of the residential building, so as to create smaller retail units that can support the legacy of the neighborhood and the Broadway streetscape. This is a rendering of the building and the theater together, and a streetscape rendering of the building and theater together. Currently, the Hollywood Theater was completed in December. They were open in a different way, obviously, due to COVID, until recently, where they've been shuttered under public health ordinance. I'm hopeful that some of you got there to see it. I went there quite often, and it's been pretty remarkable. It's intended to be full of people, so I do look forward to that day. This is a photograph. You'll forgive me my photos of the Hollywood Theater, just simply because we haven't had an opportunity to take professional photographs of the exterior, both due to COVID and the work on the building next door. You can see on the left-hand side of this photo, there's a huge water tank currently right in front of the theater. But this was the night when we turned on the neon for the first time. And it was just so thrilling. I think that we all gathered and turned it on and ran across the street and took a bunch of photos. And what a difference it makes. It's just so thrilling and emboldening. So all the metalwork on the facade was removed and replaced as new. And obviously all the old neon tubing was removed and replaced as new. The signs we kept, and they were replaced, and we have new letters, three-dimensional red letters to replicate the original lettering. So our work was really detailed in this restoration. It went down that far. I think at one point those letters had been replaced by those flat black ones that you see all the time, but we had researched back and found these three-dimensional red letters that we then had replicated for the billboard signage. This is a shot of the interior. This is from the mezzanine. The mezzanine area also had a flattened portion so that we could add a bar. We were required to add handrails at that location. So you can see beyond the handrails, those are the original seats the original concrete guardrail. There's still carvings in there from Jackie, Hart's, Jeffrey is all still maintained. We didn't want to buff any of that out, just so that living memory was brought into today. You can see the light troughs. Those were a really important element. Those were taken down, cleaned, restored, replaced with new LED lighting. You can see the little dots on the ceiling. Those are new sprinkler heads intended to disappear into the ceiling, but obviously also really important to the life safety of the work. And of course, you can see all the new lighting. So you can see the new sconces are shining brightly. Those were all, we had some original ones, but others were replicated. And you can see the gear. So the lighting rigs, I think are so, I think one of the things that I can't really speak to, but I know that is hugely important, is that the theater has been upgraded to just the highest standard of performance, so that we can invite whoever wants to come and perform here without reservation. And I know that the theater community, the live act community, the lecture community is really excited about that prospect as well. These are the bars. I love it when things turn out just like their renderings. So really, we wanted to create spaces for artifacts. So you can see in the millwork for the bars, we've created all these pockets for artifacts. That's an old reel. By the way, the old projector is still operable and in use at the theater, so we can still run our beloved 35mm film from there, but there is also a digital projector to advance it. But this was really about elevating the theater to a place that makes it relevant for today, while still attempting to keep its original flavor and its original feeling. And I hope that we accomplish that. This is, you can see here the restored rope detailing at the original plaster ceiling. We actually had a flood when we were putting in the new sprinkler pipes there. There was a very careful and extensive restoration to the plaster ceiling due to that incident that retained this small detail. This is a detail you can see restored sconce in the background, and then this is the detailing of the new brass guardrails and handrails throughout. There's probably going to be a lot of questions, and I'm happy to take the last few minutes here and entertain some.
Absolutely. There have also already been a couple trickling in, so we'll start with those. And if anyone has any additional questions, feel welcome to put those in the chat. Now's the time. So Susanna was wondering about the basement plan on the floor plan sheet. So she's just curious about, is there a basement? What's kind of down there now?
Yeah, I don't think that I have the floor plan of the basement, but I can tell you that on the southwest corner, you'll recall that there is the men's washroom downstairs. And so we added we added some urinals to that area just to get our fixture count up. And then we restored, there was original tile there that you can see in, I think, this original photo here. So you can see that there was this original green tile. So we restored and retained as much of that green tile as possible. And then we interweaved a new tile in that location. So that bathroom was upgraded and restored. And then there's a new sprinkler room on the opposite side, just underneath where the little store used to be. So we needed a new water entry room over there. So that was all restored. And then in the back, we actually have I don't know, can you guys see me?
Yeah.
Or you can see me, okay, a storage room. I'm putting that in quotes. And so that also has a access there for a staff washroom and area for seating. So the whole, the restoration was just from top to bottom, really.
Absolutely. And you talked a little bit about the seating that was
Yes.
kind of restored and retained, but because of the additions that you had to make, there was some seating removed. So what kind of happened to those theater seats?
Oh, they're still there. So the idea with the, sorry, I'll go back to the floor plan. The idea with the platform area is that the seats can be removed and replaced as necessary. So if we're going to have a Vancouver International Film Festival event or a DOXA event, that seating can be replaced on the platform area. So those have all been retained and stored as needed.
Awesome. It's nice flexibility.
Yes,
right?
It's necessary. It's absolutely necessary, I think, in order to make a venue like this remotely viable.
Absolutely. So Jonathan says, thank you, first of all, for the presentation, and what an incredible project. Given the challenges and extended time involved in undertaking a project involving an HRA, would you seek out such projects in the future? And are there any recommendations you would make, in terms of like the city processes to make it more effective tool?
I have to say that the process was long here. It was. There's no doubt about it. But I also think in a way it was needed. I think it was necessary. I think that the reason why the other attempts, and there were numerous attempts, I think, that maybe didn't quite make it to community consultation stage, that were rejected by the City of Vancouver or by the developer for various reasons, as well as we all know, there was a development permit put in at one point for a different use. And I think because this building was so important to so many different groups of people who had different, it was meaningful to them in different ways. I think the process that we undertook, even though it was long, I just think was really necessary. We had such significant support from the City of Vancouver at that time, from Mayor Gregor Robertson and particularly Kevin Quinlan, who was the Chief of Staff at that point, to really get this one done. And so without the City of Vancouver's support on it, I don't think it would have happened either. I think it's probably one of the few examples that I know of at the city where everybody was just centered on these 6 goals, and the time that it took was sort of the time that it took. Do I want to see these things move faster? Maybe, but I think that's just what democracy is in a way, right? Like, I think that's what you need to do to get to a place of consensus. And that was such a huge part of our work, was just trying to build consensus around what we were doing here. And not everybody agreed with everything, right? Like, if I had my way 100% of the time, would the project look a bit different? Probably. And I think there's probably multiple people who can say that about various different things on the project. But at the end of the day, it is a compromise. It is a negotiation for the goal of retaining this theater. And that was a question that we posed to the community, to the developer, to the city. Like, is it worth it? Is this exchange worth it? And we're so glad that everyone at the end of the day said, yes, it was worth it.
Absolutely. I have a related question to HRAs. Before we'll go on to a couple other ones. Does the HRA apply only to sites with heritage designation? Would sites with A status on the Heritage Register be eligible for these agreements? So
it is a discretionary process by the City of Vancouver. I would say that I would think that Class A heritage buildings would definitely be on the list for retention under a Heritage Revitalization Agreement. We recently started construction on the Broadhurst and Whitaker block, which is South Commercial Drive. And for that project, the city did not entertain a Heritage Revitalization Agreement, but they did give us allowances for heritage under the existing under the existing development permit. Mostly because we weren't asking for additional density. I think as soon as you're asking for density transfer, density bonus, the HRA is really the tool that you need.
Wonderful. There's a couple questions about or at least one about the balcony area, what it's being used for.
The balcony of the theater, the mezzanine area. Yeah. So it's actually like, if you look at this floor plan that I have right now, it's like a miniature one of that. So the right now, maybe I can go to the previously there was the projection room down here, so that's been retained completely. This whole sort of south area at the bottom has been retained completely, and the first row of seats has been retained, and then the second and third row of seats has been flattened similarly to what you see here. So you can have either tables and chairs there, or the old theater seats as needed. So it's still a viewing area.
Awesome. And you mentioned about that, because someone was also asking about the bar area, and kind of the floor was leveled in that area. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a platform area up on the mezzanine, similarly to what we did on the ground floor. And that just allows for that multiplicity of use.
Awesome. So some other questions. In massing the proposed building adjacent to the Hollywood Theater, was the proposed canopy at street level a requirement of the city in order to continue the height of the canopy theater?
Sorry, maybe I can just get a bit of clarity on that question. Is that related to the canopy at the residential building?
Yeah, I think they're speaking about the building beside adjacent. Yeah.
Yeah, so rather than supply a canopy that extended fully over the sidewalk, we felt quite strongly that would obscure and negate the whole point of pulling the building back from the Hollywood Theater. So rather than provide a canopy at that location, the building above projects over that public realm to form a canopy there. So the city approved that in order to maintain the dominance, let's say, at street level of the Hollywood Theater.
Thanks. And there's another question about the new building, the residential building. They're just asking, they're curious about, is it a condo or a rental, the number of units, when's it going to be completed?
So they just poured the third floor slab. So I think we're about a year to completion on that project. It's 40 units of strata. The owner's going to retain those strata units and rent them out for the time being. As most people know, the owner is very active in the community. They're they've got a real connection to Greek Town and West Broadway, and they retain most of their buildings. This is a real legacy project for them. And I hope that my sense is that they're going to retain it well into the future. We did put forward proposals to both the community and the city that would have allowed for artist live work or secured market rental, but those were rejected in favor of maintaining the 6 stories.
Yeah, well, that's encouraging to see that there's, like you said, like there will be some buildings in that area, and it's a great hub to live in. I lived just around the corner when I was going to school, so.
And we'll have to see what happens as the Broadway plan makes its way down to this area.
Absolutely, that'll impact things as well. So the Hollywood, unfortunately, as you mentioned, is closed right now due to those COVID ordinances, but it is usually open for business. Do you happen to know, do they do tours, or is that something that's a possibility in the future?
No, that's a really great question. I think that's I haven't heard of the operators offering those quite yet, and likely because of the times that we're in, but I don't see why they wouldn't. I'd do one. I'd do a tour there for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe that's something that we could arrange.
Yeah, I think that would be fascinating. I mean, this is kind of like a little sneak peek, a behind the scenes tour, but I think behind the scenes is really appealing, especially for someone who could speak to the history, point out the details.
Yeah, for sure. I think Dawn would love that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, the consensus in the chat is that everyone is very keen to go visit when
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
open. So that's wonderful. I think we're all really craving.
They've really built a really great vibe in there, and like I said, I'd been there a few times when they were permitted to be open. They've been really strict about their social distancing protocols inside the theater, but I'm really longing for the day. We fought so hard to get that occupant load to where it needed to be. And I really look forward to sitting shoulder to shoulder with all of you watching a movie there.
Yeah, something to look forward to. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
So if anyone has any last questions, feel welcome to put them in the chat. Anything you're still wondering? Is there anything you wanted to add, Marianne, before we kind of wrap things up?
Well, I think the only thing that I would add is what, I think the community involvement on this project was really extraordinary. I wanted to thank the community for their hard work and support, consistent support throughout the project. This project, it was so fulfilling for us as architects and as human beings, really, and we're just so grateful to have had the opportunity to bring it back. And we're just so, it was really just such a emboldening experience about what we can do when we all gather around shared goals and we all understand that compromise needs to be made, and this is what we can do when that happens.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great note to end things on. And thank you so much for sharing this project. And thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon to kick off our Heritage Lunch and Learns 2021. It's really been great to learn all about the Hollywood, and I know it's an icon that's much loved on Broadway. So just a little bit about things that are coming up with VHF. If you're interested in learning more about Vancouver's history, about sites like the Hollywood Theatre, we have lots of online resources, so have a look. The Heritage Site Finder, Our Places That Matter, that's all available on our website. A couple upcoming events. We have an evening lecture next week on Tuesday, which is all about the photography of Leonard Frank and Otto Landauer in celebration of Jewish Heritage Month. We'll also have our last virtual stroll of the spring with John Atkin through the industrial waterfront. That's on May 15th, so it's a Saturday morning. And exciting news is that next week we'll be announcing how we're taking our Heritage House tour virtual again. That'll be in early June. So if you're interested, that'll be in our newsletter and our website next week. So thanks again to everyone for joining us. Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you so much.
We really hope to see you again at one of our future events, and maybe in the future at the Hollywood.